All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to Building an Abundant Austin, a mayoral conversation hosted by ARA, Friends of Austin Neighborhoods, Farm&City, Rethink 35, and Safe Streets Austin. I'm Brian Smith, Head of Partnerships at Unified, the social network for activism, and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's discussion. I want to thank both candidates for joining us for this one-hour chat about topics that we know are critical for Austin's next mayor and the council, namely housing and transportation. Now, this forum is intended to be a relaxed, free-flowing discussion between the candidates. We have a lot of subjects to cover, so from time to time, I'll work to keep each candidate's response to around 2 minutes or less. So let's meet our two candidates who are here today. We have with us former Texas State Senator Kirk Watson and Texas House of Representative member Celia Israel. Each candidate, we're going to allow them 2 minutes to introduce themselves with some opening remarks, and we're going to allow Senator Watson to go first. Senator?
Great, thank you. And thanks for everybody that's watching in whatever way you might be watching. But I appreciate y'all putting on a forum like this so that we have the opportunity to talk to more folks in a more personal way. My name's Kirk Watson, as you know, and I am a former mayor of Austin. I was mayor of Austin from 1997 until 2001. I was elected to the state Senate in 2006. So I served from January 2007 until 2020. I've also been the founding dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs. In my years of involvement, many of you know I've been involved in some of the very specific issues that your different groups represent. And as I look forward to Austin in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I really have a lot of optimism. And the optimism is because I believe that this is a city that is at a turning point. We are a big city becoming a bigger city, but we're capable of addressing some of the very important needs we have. And of course, a key thing in that is cost of living and affordability and housing and how we go about addressing that cost of living and affordability issue, and the perennial problem in Austin of mobility and how best to address mobility. Both of those are issues that I've been out front on for some time, and so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
All right, thank you, Senator. And then next, Representative Israel, with your opening remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. My name is Celia Israel, member of the House of Representatives, 4 terms. I will have served 9 years when this year is done. I decided to run for mayor of the 11th largest city because I wasn't feeling an urgency from the mayor and council up till now about the issues around housing and affordability. I'm a residential realtor as well as a member of the legislature. I've been a fighter for the people of Austin, for Central Texas, and for the state of Texas. I was proud to be one of the leaders who has stood strong for transit and mobility and transportation safety over the course of those years. I'm running for mayor because the people of Austin deserve someone to stand strong for them. We cannot tolerate more delay, more study, more analysis. I launched my campaign in January and said we are in the midst of an affordability crisis. And I also said that every week in an Israel administration would be housing and affordability week. I know that we need tenacity and we need focus. And I've proven that over the course of my time in the legislature. And I will bring that to you on this topic of mobility and land use and transportation, all these connected topics. So I'll leave it there and look forward to our questions.
Great, thank you both for that. All right, so usually, we do lightning round questions at the end. We're going to maybe actually lead in with that first. So our first question here is from Ara. It's really straightforward. Are we in a housing crisis? And if we are, what are the root causes of that crisis? And if not, why are so many others wrong? Representative Israel, why don't you start first on that?
We are in a housing crisis. I didn't need to spend money on a poll or a focus group. I knew from 2021 when I began my exploratory process that people were hurting. I could feel it. I started learning more and more about what the city, the tools the city has, and I go back to the master plan of last century when this city made a determined effort to say, we don't want those kind of people here. And that's when we began to change the course of history for this city that has a big heart, but whose land use codes have not changed with the times, generation after generation. We have become a city that has said, not here, not this time, and it's done harm. Now we're one of the most economically segregated cities in the United States. So these are not things that we should be proud of, but they are things that we can change.
Okay, Senator Watson.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, the term I've been using is instead of crisis has been emergency. And part of the reason I use that term is because when we're in an emergency, you need to act, and you need to act fast. And so, 6 1, half dozen other maybe, but crisis, emergency, yes, we're in one. The question about how we got here, of course, paramount in that regard is a market situation. We're a town that people are here, they don't want to leave. You have people wanting to come here and be here, and yet supply doesn't meet demand. And it certainly supply doesn't meet demand when you start talking about trying to have the kind of town we want, which is to have housing that is across the spectrum economically. Everything from permanent supportive housing for those among us who are living homeless, to the essential workers in Austin, to the middle class, the missing middle, as we say. We don't have enough supply. Now, that's a key part. A couple of other things about that. One is that we have a broken process for being able to get housing on the ground, and that is in the permitting process. And I've laid out a plan for how we would address that so that you can get from idea to build more rapidly. The other is we have a land development code that does need updating, and needs to be done in such a way where we make certain types of development easier to do. And then we have to look at how we approach this. We have been stagnant on trying to address this for really about the last decade. And so we haven't made the kind of progress that we could have made as we go along. So that is a general overview of why we are where we are, but those are the kinds of things that we can fix, or at least address well.
Okay, thank you for that. Our next question is from the organization Farm&City, and they bring up a really great point here. Travis County and Austin, we fall within several regional governmental organizations, including the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Capital Area Council of Governance, often called CAPCOG. As mayor, which reforms or programs would you champion at those regional governmental levels to help achieve the city's goals around issues like mode share, affordability, equity, vehicles, miles traveled, carbon reduction, you name it, all of the goals that the city stated? How can we do that with those regional governmental groups? Senator Watson?
Sure. That's a great question, and a big one, because while we are focused on Austin and we're running for mayor of Austin, it's the biggest, of course, but it's about 1 million people in a region of 2.3 million. So in both of those places, I believe you're going to need to be advocating for a variety of different things. When you start with Campo, of course, you're talking about the area's designated regional planning organization for mobility and transportation. So what that plays a role in everything from economics to affordability, because if you have people that are living in the region but want to be able to get around, and they're living in the region for a variety of reasons, but affordability is going to be one of those reasons, then they need to be able to get around. We need to provide them transportation outlets that will allow for that. The second thing that pops in my mind is working with CAPCOG and others. We will need that to address things like the climate equity plan that we have, which is, in part, it calls for making sure that we're doing right by setting aside land so that we will be in a position to help fight climate change. and deal with things like food insecurity by preserving farmland and community-based opportunities in that regard. So, and then, you know, the final thing I'll say in my 2 minutes here is water. We have to, we have the water forward plan. I was very involved in water issues as mayor and as senator for Austin, but we're going to have to address water in an aggressive way. And that's going to be best addressed regionally by Austin focusing on our surface water and, but yet planning for how the whole region is going to address things.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Representative Israel?
Yeah, we're going to need the support of the legislature when it comes to water. I agree. I am very concerned about that, that resource in particular. The rule of capture is a unique one in Texas, and we will need the support of the legislature as our neighbors from around the state find their well is dry, and we have a role to play in that. We are all in this mixture together. The first project that comes to mind, of course, is Project Connect. It was overwhelmingly supported by the voters in 2020, and we have a responsibility as a city and as a region to make sure that we are doing right by the voters who entrusted us with that vision. Many modes are needed, and a respect for those who are so that we can have multi-mode, so that someone can say, I'm just going to walk to work, or I'm going to take a bike to work, and I'm going to do so with a canopy and safety in mind. These are problems that are challenging us because of what I alluded to with your first question. We have encouraged sprawl. We have not encouraged density. Project Connect with this is a huge investment. I'm excited about the prospect of it, but if we don't do land use and transportation in concert, then we're missing the point. So I mentioned Project Connect because we have one transit authority, but that transit authority relies upon many partners at the county and the local level so that we can make life-changing, positive changes for the region as well as for the city.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Well, that concludes our lightning round questions. I also want to thank you again. You did such a great job staying right on time. I really appreciate that so much. Let's get into a little bit deeper discussion on some of these topics here that we've already hinted at and discussed. The first being landowner protest rights and the land use veto. For those of you watching here, let me give you a little bit of background if you're not familiar with the process and what's happened to date. Code Next was a decades-long effort to modernize Austin's land use development code, also called LDC. Texas law dictates that if owners of at least 20% of land of nearby properties oppose a zoning change, this constitutes a valid petition, and the change has to be approved by a supermajority of 9 out of the 11 members of council. The City Council attempted to pass Code Next on a simple majority vote without giving property owners the opportunity to file a protest. They argued that Texas law did not apply to these citywide changes. After a lawsuit, the courts declared that Code Next violated Texas law. My first question is for you, Representative Israel. Now, you said in your answer to Ara's questionnaire that, quote, we should move ahead with changes to our development practices to have an immediate and robust impact to housing choice and supply, and move on individual policies within the LDC that were overwhelmingly supported by the City Council. So tell us, what are some of those changes, in your opinion, that would be overwhelmingly supported by City Council and you think could be passed?
I firmly believe that we are in a different political time now than we were even 3 or 4 years ago. This is not the old Austin that will be coming out to vote this November. We will have we have a young population. We have a population that's also understands, like I do, that this is a critical time for us to move forward on housing solutions. So this summer I put out a housing and affordability policy that had a couple of suggestions. Of course, the permitting problem is an ongoing problem. How many mayors have come before you all to say, I'm going to fix that permitting problem? These are generations long issues. But when it comes to building smarter, we are treating a 300 unit complex the same way we treat a fourplex. And that is a lengthy site plan review that only serves to delay. And that delay means for that person who is building a home, they're just going to shrug their shoulders and say, well, I'm just going to build a big house. Maybe I'll build a big house and a little house, but I'm not going to build a fourplex because, you know, I gotta move my business forward. So this is that's one item. And you know, I'm also advocating, because of the issues around permitting are so entrenched. Unfortunately, we need to encourage the speed and quick decision making. And I've introduced the concept of an ombudsman in the course of my policy, so that that ombudsman reports directly to the city manager, so that's a way to speed up the process and unclog the system. We are a system that's gotten used to not building and not moving quickly, and that means we haven't built enough homes for the times that we're living in.
Okay.
So,
Senator,
yeah.
take a couple minutes to follow up.
Sure.
What do you think can be passed on council?
Well, I would approach this in a couple of ways. One is, I think that when we talk about Project Connect and transit, I see Project Connect, and I think most folks do, they see Project Connect as a foundation for transportation, obviously, but it's also a foundation for a housing plan and how we can get more housing on the ground and more density. First of all, that rail system will fail unless we have more density. And I think the voters were saying we want to have the kind of density so that that system will actually work. In addition to that, we passed $300 million worth of displacement money, and that makes it there's a recognition that this is part of housing. So I think what you do is, and you could be able to pass this fairly easily, I think, is you go in and you say these transit corridors are housing corridors. And in some instances, what I've called for is that we actually ask for minimums. This is the minimum you can develop in these areas, as opposed to the way things tend to work in Austin, which is this is the maximum. So we utilize those corridors as housing corridors. I also think that there's an ability here to do some things like create patterns or opportunities for more ADUs, because people will see those as not only creating more housing itself, but also helping in some instances, because of the money you can, by rental and that sort of thing, that helps people stay where they are, thus making their current home more affordable. And I believe that we'd be in a position, for example, just to use one example, if you said that there's a piece of property, and with the FAR on that piece of property, you can build X size McMansion, make it where if you can build X size McMansion, you can build the same using the same FAR, something that you're going to have that size as a matter of current right in the neighborhood. Okay. You would be in a position to turn that into duplex, triplex, or quadruplex.
Well, Senator, let me ask you, your proposed housing policy emphasizes a local decision-making process at district-level code reform. So, for instance, I believe on your website it says that you want to allow each city council member to bring forward a set of district-specific reforms. However, in many districts, these rezoning cases, they only affect perhaps maybe one or two properties, yet they still fail to achieve a supermajority vote on the council, even though they only really affect one district. So, given that some council members have shown a willingness to block housing even in other districts, how do you foresee getting a district-level code reform passed with a supermajority?
Well, in some instances, you're going to have that. There's no question, because you have to follow the law, and the law is going to do that. But part of what I'm suggesting is that if, for example, District X believes that you can make a certain type of zoning change that would make a difference, that would be brought to council. And you're right, council has to vote on it, and council has to follow the law in that regard. But what you would do is you would have this is the way that district wants to meet the baseline across the city, which is currently, I guess, we could call the blueprint on housing as the baseline across the city. That district says this is the way that we want to address that blueprint, achieve the goal we want to achieve, and therefore there would be difference that would be played there. In addition, what my plan does is it incentivizes that sort of activity by allowing for what we're calling an affordability annuity, where if one district is doing more and doing it faster in terms of trying to meet the baseline, then what would happen is they'd be incentivized by receiving an increment of the tax dollars that would be created as a result of that, because you're having greater density. And they could use that for things like anti-displacement, rental assistance, parks, libraries, those sorts of things. And there would be, that is a way to address equity and a way to address getting there faster and incentivize that. And other places wouldn't get that if they're not meeting the baseline at that rate.
Representative Israel, what do you think of that proposal?
I wholeheartedly disagree with the senator on this. I think, if you go down Lamar, how can we say that we support Project Connect when you can go down Lamar in the future if we had this in place, and you would have car lots on one side of Lamar in one district and mixed use vertical on the other side of Lamar. We're not taking the benefit of that corridor. We're not maximizing our investment. We're not talking about 10 years down the road. We're talking about 100 years down the road when we will no longer be here walking the earth. You do transit and you do transportation for the generations that follow. I'm trying to break up the city from its habits. It's gotten used to saying no. It's gotten used to saying, asking questions. Let's do more study and more analysis. I certainly want to respect where a neighborhood input should be, and they deserve that, and they deserve that feedback. But breaking things up by council district only exacerbates the problem that got us here in the first place.
If I might,
go ahead.
There may be a misunderstanding about what the plan is and what my last two answers were. My answer was that on transit corridors would be corridors where you would go in and create, in some cases, minimums. That is not something that there would be veto power. If that is a citywide, that would be a citywide decision voted to get that into place. Anything, for example, the work that's going on right now with regard to compatibility and vertical mixed use, or if we did something like what I want to do with ADUs, or what I was talking about on getting from McMansions to duplexes plus, those would be the kinds of things that could be voted on citywide, and they would not be part of a district coming forward and saying, this is something we need to add to that. That would be in addition to. And keep in mind, one of the ways this could be done is you make the change, in some instances, the change in the code, which you could get the change in the code that then would be able to blanket the city. And part of the problem has been that there was an effort to make a blanket zoning changes at the same time. So there are other ways to address that issue, but it's a misunderstanding to say that we wouldn't build out those transit corridors.
Representative Israel, if you want to take another minute just to respond to that before we move on to the next question.
At the end of the day, this is a city that has clung to the past, and we haven't made any significant adjustments to the land use code. If you believe in blanket changes, then let's do blanket changes. Let's just talk about blanket changes, and instead of playing games around who lives in what district and what they can and cannot do and what incentives they get. I'm more interested in us moving forward. And the only significant thing we've done since the turn of the last century is ADUs. And that's we can't ADU our way out of this crisis. We need bold, creative land use changes, and we need changes to our land use code.
So there are also other suggestions that have been made about how to actually legally pass some of these reforms. Some current council candidates have suggested by doing it through just a simple majority. So in the case that you're unable to assemble the 9 votes to pass housing reform, how would you be willing to try to do that through a simple majority process? Have you explored that? What ideas do you have around to do that? Let me start with Representative Israel this time.
Yeah, in my world, in the legislative world, when you get to 76 votes, you move things forward. I think one of the problems that people have with where we are right now politically is we wait until we got it just right, and you let the perfect be the enemy of moving things forward. Again, we will have a lot of neighborhood engagement and involvement as we get to these projects, but here we are fighting parcel by parcel. But I hope that we will get to a point where we can have a mayor and a council that is prone to action, and prone to creative land use, and prone to more kinds of housing for more kinds of people in every part of the city. Our affordable housing right now is chunked out in 2 East Side districts. If you're a nurse who works at Seton, or your cafeteria worker who works at Seton at 34th and Lamar, you can live nowhere close to that. Do we or do we not value the men and women who are driving this economy? There's a larger economic story here, and it's not sustainable to this economy that we keep doing patchwork and piecemeal changes to our land use code. That's in concert with Project Connect and our transportation plan.
Senator?
Yeah, so if you don't have a valid petition requiring a supermajority, I mean, we have to follow the law, and the courts have just made it very clear in the last year, we have to follow the law. So if you don't have the requirement of the valid petition, then you can pass things with the majority, and should. I've joked, some people have said that you won't have as much unanimity as maybe we had the last time I was mayor, and my response has been, well, one of the big differences between me now and then is I've been a Democratic leader in the Texas Senate. So I'm not looking for unanimity. I'm looking for the votes necessary to move something forward. So if you don't have a valid petition in place, then there's going to be opportunities to move things forward without trying to get a supermajority. When I was mayor before, there were 7 members of the council, the mayor and 6 members of the council. So 2 people could serve as a block on when you had a valid petition. And for a while, there were 2 council members that said they would never vote against a valid petition, thus making it very difficult to, in some instances, very frustrating, where you could see the value of, in many cases, affordability and density, but you weren't able to get it because of that block. So if you don't have the valid petition in front of you, there are going to be times when the simple majority will rule.
Let's move on. We're going to move on to our next topic here, which covers VMU2's compatibility and missing middle housing. So again, a little bit of background on this topic for those of you who are unfamiliar with this. The vertical mixed use density bonus program lets developers build taller and designated transit corridors in exchange for more affordable housing. However, this height is often not allowed because of compatibility, which is a rule that often limits the heights of buildings within 540 feet of a single family home. So my first question is, most of you have expressed support for reducing parking requirements and reducing compatibility along these transit corridors. Should we have any parking or any compatibility requirements along these corridors? Should compatibility play any role along these transit corridors, or should it be eliminated altogether? Senator Watson, I'll pose this question to you first.
Sure, be happy to answer that. I think you're going to have some parking, and you're going to have some compatibility. That's why I think it's going to require that there be thoughtful approach to all this. But as I say that, go back to what I've been saying about the transit corridors. Those, in my mind, have been voted as areas that we're going to do probably less parking because you have it on a transit corridor. And in some instances, you might even have no parking in certain parts of the hub or where you have a stop. In addition, the same thing could happen with regard to compatibility. I think you can do some of these things where it also benefits the neighborhoods because you will create an opportunity for more walkable neighborhoods and more opportunity, for example, restaurants and retail that add to the quality of life. It will be, transit corridors offer us a real opportunity to minimize and in some cases probably eliminate some of those issues.
Okay, Representative Israel.
Yep, Brian, the bottom line is I'm just a realtor with opinions, and sometimes I act like I'm a transportation engineer, and sometimes I act like I'm an urban planner. But I want folks to have flexibility with all of these opportunities to build more housing. We should prioritize housing. And I'm not that kind of realtor. Like, I'm not, a luxury realtor who deals with stuff in the inner city, but more and more people who are looking to buy, they want to buy something that is, of course, affordable for their family, but they may want one parking space and a couple of bicycles, or they want 2 scooters. We need to respect the fact that times are changing, and to mandate parking or to put parking minimums is to handcuff that design team who should be building more homes for people as opposed to homes for cars.
So if I hear you both, it sounds like you're both in favor of reform to the current process, but not eliminating the need for these regulations altogether.
Say that again, Brian. I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit.
Oh, my apologies. I just wanted to be clear that it sounds like you're both in favor of reform as opposed to eliminating the need altogether.
Yes, but I want to be clear, there may be instances, particularly as you're talking about areas around transit stops.
Okay. I trust you can hear me okay. I'm just want to make sure it's coming through. So now, when it comes to increasing housing supply, there is an oft-stated idea that housing should be added where it's most appropriate. The problem, however, is that there's no unanimous agreement about where that is appropriate. So, for example, Senator, in your response to the Friends of Austin's Neighborhood questionnaire, you wrote, "We will move with urgency to increase Austin's housing stock in areas where it is most appropriate." Representative Israel, you wrote in the same questionnaire that we need all types of housing for all types of people in all parts of our great city. So I'll start with Representative Israel. Some believe we need more housing in all parts, but some staunchly oppose that. How would you weigh these different points of views? Who gets to decide where the housing is most appropriate and where it's inappropriate?
Well, this year the voters get to decide. Do we want more status quo? Do we want more of the same? Or do you want a truly pro-housing mayor and a pro-housing council? I would argue that I am your pro-housing candidate, and this is not to say that I believe that back to my point, this is a very different political time that we're living in. People who might have been opposed to a set of row houses on a tract of land are now thinking, well, where's my kid going to live, or where's my grandkid going to live? And what's happening right now in Austin is not sustainable to the environment. It's not sustainable to us fitting into that uniform of the 11th largest city in the country. So my policies call for expedited review when someone is taking what was a commercial parking lot, for example, and rezoning it to mixed use vertical. And when someone is taking the city's property. We own 6,000 tracts of land. On my website, Celia for Austin, we point to the Justin Lane and Lamar tract, which the city has been thinking about doing housing there for about 12 years. We can't afford to study things to death but I do believe that we will continue to build new community that is welcoming, that is connected to its adjacent neighborhoods and its adjacent surroundings. And in the case of the Justin Lane tract, that is adjacent to a train station that's adjacent to the #1 bus. So we've got to break through this old way of doing things, and we can do it so that we can look back on this crisis. Every American city is going through this, and say Austin did bold and creative things with its own land and with land that had outlived its purpose.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Where do you think it's most appropriate,
Well,
and how do we decide what's appropriate?
So we're going to, well, that gets, council is involved in that, but the way you start with a baseline, and the baseline that I think we've been operating under for the last couple of years at least is the blueprint, so that there would be housing everywhere. You would have additional housing everywhere in the city, and you would say we need to meet that as a minimum in the various districts. So that we know we're going to do that, or we're at least going to push to do that. And part of my plan is to help incentivize districts saying, here's how we can best achieve that, and actually get it on the ground. And again, create priority for priority on services and those sorts of things in order to incentivize that activity. I've also said that we ought to look at things like Decker Lake, where you have 2,500 acres of fallow land that is on a rail line, because the green line goes right up to that. And what you could do is set aside enough acreage that you would have the largest park in Austin by far, no matter what. And then what you could do is we could master plan that in a way where you would have all sorts of housing in addition to the housing that we're looking for in the various parts of the city. We need to look for opportunities like that. I've also said give incentives for retrofitting office buildings into housing, and also identifying large chunks of commercial property that you could easily and quickly zone in such a way that it would incentivize building more housing in those places.
Okay. Representative Israel, what do you think about that, about master plan communities in Decker Lake and expanding out in that area? Do you want to keep it citywide? Do you want to focus on particular areas? It sounds like you're more focused on, again, the citywide approach.
It drives me crazy to hear people continue to refer to outlying areas and the so-called Eastern Crescent. It's overlooking the obvious, which is we've got a transit system and an arterial system that is not being fully utilized right now with old ways of looking at how we use land. So I'm obviously open to talking about how we build new housing where things are undeveloped, but it's ignoring the fact that people are hurting right now and we're getting pushed out to Bastrop and Buda and Elgin, and it doesn't help them that we're not looking at where can we take inner city opportunities to say to that nurse at Seton, to that teacher at Zilker Elementary, to the kindergarten teacher who teaches at the Foundation Communities preschool and at Lamar and Palmer Lane. You're welcome here. We're doing this for you because you matter to us and you matter to this economy.
All right, thank you for that. Now, of course, we've kind of neglected transportation a little bit to this point. We've talked a lot about housing, so we want to make sure we cover that topic as well. And one of the biggest ones, of course, is Interstate 35. So my question, I'll start with Senator Watson. Do you support TxDOT's proposed expansion of Interstate 35, and why or why not?
As a general rule, I support where TxDOT is headed with regard to I-35. And have been working on that along with Representative Israel for many years in an effort to do away with or change in a more meaningful, positive way that barrier, that monument to racism, and a road that doesn't work well. The truth of the matter is that there may be better designs that I would prefer, but that we won't be able to get. And the way I look at I-35 is it has a number of variables to it. People are moving out for whatever reason. Some of it may be affordability or otherwise, but let's assume it's affordability for a minute. We care about them until they move out of the city, and then we don't care about them about how we get them into the city. And I-35 would play a role in that. Second, I-35, so it'd play a role in regional housing. I-35, but for Project Connect, would be the largest transit program we have in the region, because the additional managed lanes, I would prefer to see them as managed toll lanes because I think that would operate better, but managed HOV lanes will put us in a position for transit in a way we weren't before on I-35. And we've seen the success of that in the managed lane on MOPAC in what we've seen with transit. The other part about it is whether you like cars or not, people are driving cars, and this would make that road operate better. And then the final thing I'll say about it is a monument to racism. And if you can lower that road to grade and make it where you have stitching that connects east and west, and the ability, and we're going to have to find the money for it, the ability to cap, in some instances, it looks like we could cap up to 22 acres. It would completely change that racist road, and it would become an asset to the city in ways that we can't imagine under the current scenario. Last thing I'll say, you've got to keep that road operating as a functional road, or you're going to swamp East Austin on cars that will be getting off of that road and digging through East Austin to try to get where they want to go.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Representative Israel, TxDOT's plan for I-35, are you for it or are you against it?
My colleagues and I in the House, the Travis County delegation has written 3 letters to TxDOT expressing our desires for I-35 to be better, to be different. Every time I meet with TxDOT, I'm asking for transit assets, and needless to say, I'm not happy with where things are going with TxDOT. And this goes back to the feeling that I firmly believe that TxDOT is more controlled by political forces rather than the voices of Austinites. And I-35 is a historical part of our racist past, separating East and West. But we have an opportunity to re-envision this headache known as I-35, not just for one generation, but multiple generations. We do need transit assets on I-35. I'm sympathetic to my friends who want a boulevard. I see some comments popping up here. I have a long record of being an advocate for transportation safety, calming down speeds, supporting cyclists and so forth. So I understand completely where you're coming from. I refuse to accept that we're getting the best deal from TxDOT. The bottom line, I don't think that stitches are the answer. I don't, and I will, if I truly wanted to bring back East and West together, it's bury it and cap it and build value for generations to come on that cap, and truly bring East and West together. So I'm never satisfied. That's just the way I am as a member of the House. I'm always pushing, and I think our job is as mayor is to push and ask for more. Why should I accept the silver when I can get the gold? And I respect everyone's opinion on here, but I just simply believe we're not getting everything that we could be.
One angle that we haven't discussed with the additional lanes on I-35 is the environmental impact. I mean, do you think that adding additional lanes to I-35 is in harmony with the Austin Climate Equity Plan, which calls for, net zero community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2040? So, Representative Israel, do you want to address that?
Yeah, no, it's not. I understand where I understand where we're talking about managed lanes, but the state won't let us talk about managed lanes. So that's like, thou shalt not talk about managed lanes. We need to look no further than, I suppose, any major American city who has thought they could build their way out of congestion and it hadn't worked. So that's a reality. So, TxDOT put the big kibosh on this when we were talking managed lanes and iced the whole thing over, and they suddenly woke up again. And I'm not a believer that we need to stick to what they said: no wider, no higher, and let's continue to challenge them to give us the best asset possible.
Senator,
Sure.
you mentioned earlier that you're in favor of adding lanes to I-35. How do you consider the environmental impacts of that and the
Well,
impact that will have?
a couple of things. I want to start with the proposition that it is easy to say we would like to have it better than what we're seeing now. And we might want additional things, but one of the things that we have to be is practical and realistic, and where the money is going to come from to do the kinds of things that some people would like to see is a problem. And particularly if some of those things that get done cause cars to start digging through neighborhoods and slowing down and having greater congestion, that adds to the emission problem. If you can improve both the traffic flow so that you reduce emissions and you enhance transit so that what you're doing is getting more people on rapid buses coming into the city, then you have the opportunity at least to make a difference. That parking lot that sits out there for a big part of the day is not helping. So we ought to be looking for ways that are practical and will at least benefit us, as opposed to saying, I want nothing in terms of making the change.
We have other community-led alternatives. There are groups out there like Rethink 35 and Reconnect Austin. Are you supportive of those efforts? Are there elements of those proposals that you would like to see incorporated? Give us your thoughts on some of these community-led alternatives.
You talking to me?
Yeah, I'll start with you, Senator.
Sure,
Yeah.
be happy to. I actually think that they've made a difference over time. I think that the process, if you look at where TxDOT was in, say, 2011, 2012, to where they are now, I think you've seen significant progress. And I believe it is in part because organizations and groups like this have offered ideas that are excellent ideas. I mean, up until about 2017, there was talk about how you would improve traffic flow by adding a lane to the upper deck. And now we're talking about taking out the upper deck. So I think that that has provided value. I also believe that there are probably unintended consequences, and I've mentioned one a couple of times, and I'll repeat myself again, but when you slow it down too much, you're going to, and we've seen this happen in other neighborhoods, you're going to force cars to try to find a way to get where they're wanting to go, because I mean, that they're 80%, about 80% of the traffic that is on that part of I-35 is generated in this region. So they're specifically wanting to be on that portion of the road, and you'll send them into neighborhoods and you'll actually exacerbate certain problems.
Representative Israel, would you be supportive of looking into some of these community alternatives, perhaps funding greater study into them, or are there particular elements that you would like to see incorporated into the future plans?
Well, I was sitting in my Capitol office when I started getting the flood of emails that people were copying me when they were sending to TxDOT And I remember calling Tom Wall to say, what the hell is going on? And I meant it in a good way. I love the advocacy. I love the noise. I love the engagement. I think sometimes when we plan these things, we have the community engagement process and 20 people show up and we act like, wow, that was great. What an amazing amount of input that we got. So to get the input from advocates who are advocating for change, to me, even though I might not agree with their final vision of I-35, was a breath of fresh air. I need that as a member of the legislature, as someone who believes passionately in mode change, in multimodal supports, and also respects the fact that we need to update I-35. So I was very excited to see it, and I was excited to see the lawsuit, stir up trouble, make some noise. I'm all for it.
Okay, we're going to move on to our last topic here, which is the debate between the space for cars versus space for people. The Austin Strategic Mobility Plan calls for 50% or less of daily commuter trips to be single occupancy vehicles by 2030. Adding car lanes and infrastructure induces more driving and perhaps works against that goal. So even if we simultaneously add bike and pedestrian infrastructure, we may not be making up the gains. Now, both of you have expressed support for building additional bike lanes, sidewalks, and dedicated bus lanes, but the space has got to come from somewhere. So, Representative Israel, where are we going to get the space?
The future of transportation is autonomous, and it is electric. And I love microtransit. And I think that our transit authority can be a real partner with us, with our technology partners here who have been experimenting for years in the region with creative solutions to transit that really works for people. And I'm excited about what the future holds for making use of our existing infrastructure. And this goes back to our earlier discussion about land use. Though we've got to create more housing on and adjacent to these corridors so that more and more people can get an e-bike, as cool as those are right now and trendy, but can say I can safely bike now, or there's a micro transit option that will work for me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. For God's sake, we've got to shake it up.
Okay, Senator Watson, where are we going to get the land?
Well, I think when the voters voted on Project Connect, they told us multiple things. I talked about housing a few minutes ago, but they also told us that they want alternatives and they're willing to make certain commitments with regard to space to allow for things like that to happen. Now, we'll have some fights over this and that. We've already had some about where things might go. But that gives us, I think, the opportunity to look at everything from bike lanes to things like microtransit, where autonomous vehicles are going to play a role, and where buses will be able to go. And I think that we have in many ways, the go-ahead, if you will, on looking at that and being both appropriately aggressive and innovative to get to the result that I think the voters have told us they want to see. There's no way that 10 and 20 years from now, we can still be operating the way we're operating, or we'll be locked down.
All right, thank you, Senator. We've got about 5 minutes remaining in our conversation today, so it's time for closing remarks. Each candidate's going to have about 2 minutes, and we're going to start with Representative Israel. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Brian. Brian, you have a great voice. It's very sexy.
Thank you.
Let me say thank you to everybody here who cares. You are my people. I have needed your voice for so long, and I wanna elevate your voice as somebody who it sometimes feels lonely on that dais in the transportation hearings when I ask the transit question time and time again of TxDOT, and they know it's coming, so get ready because she's going to ask you that transit question. I believe strongly that this is a unique moment in time for Austin to be thoughtful about who you want. Councilmember Vela has endorsed me. He needs me and I need him if we're going to really truly rethink I-35 if we're going to truly redo the way that we use land. I was raised on the bus. Dad was a truck driver. He'd be gone for 2 or 3 days at a time. So Mom would grab me by the hand and say, "We're going downtown." Mom never got her driver's license. I have used the bus throughout my years here in Austin as a UT student, as a young professional who lived in North Central Austin when I could afford to live there, to get on the number 7 and then get on my bike and go to my office in downtown Austin. I love that. For me, transit is freedom. Transit is equity. And I want to be the mayor for us during these really critical decision-making times. Thank you for your time.
Senator.
Thanks. And Brian, thanks for doing a good job of moderating. And I want to thank everybody that took time to be here, plus those that are watching in some other fashion. I have been, but when I was mayor, I was the first mayor that actually pushed to get rail on the ballot. And many of you will remember that passed in Austin, but we didn't win by less than 2,000 votes. Although the red line has its limitations and issues, I felt so strongly about that I was the chair of the effort to get that passed at the time we put that on the ballot. When I was in the Senate, we needed Capital Metro to be operating in a way that was credible and people would pay attention to and actually would be better in its functioning. I was the one that pushed and made Capital Metro go through the Texas Sunset Review process so that our transit would work better and more like the way we want it. We need more transit. We need more mobility options. As I said earlier, it is the perennial problem. We also need to be able to have more housing, and we need to deal with our cost of living and affordability emergency in a way where we're actually getting things done. We have been stagnant for a decade. We have made it a zero-sum game, all or nothing, winner take all. I win and you lose. I will bring a different approach to that, where we will actually get things done and we'll be able to move the city forward. So I look forward to working with you all. I thank you for having this candidate forum, and I would appreciate your support.
All right, and that concludes our session here at Building an Abundant Austin, a mayoral conversation. I want to thank both candidates, Representative Celia Israel and Senator Kirk Watson, for participating in what I thought was a really informative and engaged discussion. And of course, I want to thank all of our partner organizations, starting with ARA, Friends of Austin Neighborhoods, Farm&City, Rethink 35, and Safe Streets Austin, for helping make today's event possible. And finally, I want to thank you, wherever you are, for tuning in today. Now, before you go, I want to let you know that ARA is having its endorsement vote for this November's local elections. If you're already a member, please go and vote before this Monday. ARA is also accepting new members, so if you'd like to join, you can visit their website at aura-atx.org. Once again, I'm Brian Smith, Head of Partnerships at Unified, the social network for activism. Thanks so much for having me, and don't forget to vote this November. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.